Do not sit at that table. That table is for real students, not people like you. Did you hear me? You people never listen. Your table is by the trash, where you belong. Now move before I make you move in front of everybody.
The assistant principal's voice sliced across the cafeteria, and 300 forks went still at once. A 14-year-old girl was already halfway into her seat, tray in her hands, when the woman grabbed the back of the chair and dragged it out from under her. "Did you hear me?" The woman's lip curled. "You people never listen. Your table is by the trash, where you belong. Now move before I make you move in front of everybody." The girl didn't cry. That was the saddest part. She had cried so many times over the last 4 months that she'd learned how to stop the tears before they came, right there behind her eyes, like closing a door on a house that was already on fire. She picked up her tray. She walked, small and silent, toward a wobbling table pushed against the far wall by the trash cans, the one place in that beautiful school where nobody had to look at her. And near the double doors, a man in a worn gray jacket stopped so suddenly it was like he'd walked into glass. It was her father, and the woman who had just called his daughter garbage in front of the whole school had no idea she'd just ended her own career, her pension, and the good name of one of the most prestigious schools in America. Let me tell you who was hiding behind that lunch tray. Her name was Ava Bennett, and she was the loneliest girl at Ridgemont Preparatory Academy. Not because she was strange, not because she was unkind. She was gentle and quiet and painfully smart, the kind of girl who read 3 books a week and remembered everyone's birthday. She was lonely because a grown woman with a lanyard and 22 years of authority had spent 4 months teaching an entire school that Ava Bennett was less than them, and a school full of children and teachers had decided it was easier to believe that woman than to defend a quiet black girl who never fought back. Every morning, Ava got up before her alarm. She ironed her uniform until it was perfect, because she had learned that if she gave them one wrinkle, one loose thread, one thing, they would use it. She braided her hair tight and neat. She practiced smiling in the mirror so that no one at breakfast could tell. And then she rode to a school that hated her and pretended all day, every day, that it didn't hurt. At lunch, she sat alone by the trash cans. When she raised her hand in class, the teacher's eyes slid past her to a white student instead. In the hallways, she heard the whispers, the ones she was clearly meant to hear. "She's only here because the school needed to look diverse. Bet she's on some charity scholarship. Bet her family can barely afford the bus." And Ava would look down at the marble floor of that 400-year-old academy and swallow it, because she had promised herself she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She was 14 years old, and she was carrying all of it completely alone. Because here is the thing that will hurt you the most. Ava had a father who loved her more than his own life. A father who would have burned that school to the ground for her. And she never told him a single word of it. To understand why, you have to understand her father. Marcus Bennett grew up in a part of Cleveland that never made it onto a postcard, the kind of place where the heat got cut off in the dead of winter, and his mother boiled water on the stove just to warm the apartment. His father drove a city bus for 29 years and never once called in sick, because a sick day was a day the family didn't eat. His mother cleaned office towers downtown at night, gleaming buildings full of glass and computers, and she'd come home at 2 in the morning smelling of bleach and tell her son the same words every time. "You are going to work in a building like that one day, baby. Not cleaning it, building it." Marcus had a little sister named Grace. She was the bright one, everyone said so, a girl who could take apart a radio at 9 and put it back together before dinner. She got sick the winter Marcus turned 12. Just a fever that wouldn't break. But there was no insurance, so his parents waited and waited, because a hospital was money they didn't have. By the time they carried her through the emergency room doors, it was too late. Marcus sat in that hospital hallway and stared at the floor and thought one thought over and over while his baby sister slipped away. If we'd had more, she'd still be here. That thought never left him. It built him. He worked 2 jobs through high school. He earned a scholarship to a state university and studied computers because Grace had loved machines and building things felt like the only way left to talk to her. He wrote code in a dorm room until 3 in the morning. After graduation, he took a folding table and a second-hand laptop into the corner of a friend's garage in Austin, ate cereal for dinner because it was cheap, and turned one idea into a piece of software that changed how hospitals share a patient's records, so that no child would ever again die in a hallway because the information that could have saved them was locked in the wrong building. That garage became Bennett Systems. Today it trades on the stock exchange, $14 billion, more than 6,000 employees, software running inside 900 hospitals in 40 countries. Marcus Bennett built every brick of it with his own hands, his own grief, and a dead little girl's name living quietly in his chest. And then, 3 years ago, the one thing money couldn't outrun caught him anyway. His wife Diane started getting tired. Just tired, they thought. She was a middle school science teacher, the kind students still write letters to 20 years later. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it was everywhere. Marcus had $14 billion. He flew in specialists from 3 countries. He bought treatments most families can't even dream of, and none of it mattered. He learned the cruelest lesson of his life for the second time. Some things, money cannot buy back. Diane died on a Sunday morning in spring, holding his hand, with their little girl asleep in the chair beside the bed. Ava was 11. After the funeral, the 2 of them sat in the car in the cemetery parking lot because neither one could face going home to a house with her mother's coffee cup still in the sink. And Marcus made his daughter a promise. He told her she was going to grow up normal. No bodyguards trailing her to birthday parties, no private jet to school, no one treating her like a fragile little thing made of money. She would earn what she earned and feel what every other kid feels, because that was the childhood Diane had dreamed for her, and it was the last gift Marcus had left to give. So when Ava tested into Ridgemont Academy 2 years later, on nothing but her own brilliant scores, Marcus did what almost no billionaire on earth would do. He called the head of school himself and gave a single instruction. No one is to know who I am, not the teachers, not the board. Treat my daughter exactly like every other child in this building. He paid her full tuition every August by a quiet wire transfer, from an account no one at the school could trace, so that not one soul at Ridgemont knew there was a $14 billion fortune standing behind that quiet girl by the trash cans. He did it to protect her. He never dreamed it would leave her defenseless, because the instruction that was meant to shield Ava is exactly what handed her to Karen Voss. Karen Voss had been Ridgemont's assistant principal for 22 years, and she had a very particular idea of what a Ridgemont child looked like. From Ava's very first week, Voss looked at her and decided the truth for herself. Scholarship case, charity admit, diversity number. She was wrong about every part of it, but the facts never mattered to Karen Voss. What mattered was the sneer. It started small, a comment here, a comment there. Then it grew teeth. Voss invented a rule that did not exist, that Ava was to sit at a separate table, apart from the other students. And when Ava looked to her teachers for help, the teachers looked at their shoes, because Karen Voss sat on the discipline committee and could make a teacher's life a nightmare, and a silent black girl was simply not worth the risk. So they let it happen. Every day, they let it happen. And Ava, who could have ended it all with one phone call to the most powerful father in the state, said nothing, on purpose, to protect him. She had watched Marcus bury his sister's memory and then bury her mother. She could not stand to be one more wound in a man who had already lost so much. She told herself he had a company to run, 6,000 jobs on his shoulders, sick children in 900 hospitals depending on his software. She told herself that if she reported it, they'd find out who her father was, And then everyone would say she only belonged there because of his money. And losing that, the one thing she'd earned all by herself, felt worse than the trash cans. So she carried a grown woman's cruelty on her own thin shoulders, 4 days a week, 4 months straight, and let her grieving father believe she was happy. She lost weight. Marcus noticed and blamed it on a growth spurt. She went quiet at dinner. He blamed it on being 14. What he didn't know was that every single morning, before Ava left for that school, she did one small thing that had become the only thing holding her together. 2 years ago, in the last week of her life, Diane had left notes for her daughter, little ones, on torn scraps of paper, tucked where Ava would find them, in a lunchbox, in a coat pocket, under a pillow. Diane knew she was dying, and she could not leave Ava a whole childhood of a mother, so she left her what she could, small paper voices, to be found later, when she was gone. Ava had saved every one, but there was a single note she carried with her everywhere. Folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. 4 words, in her mother's slanted teacher's handwriting. Be brave today, baby. Every morning, before she walked into Ridgemont, Ava opened that note in the back seat of the car and read those 4 words. Then she folded it up, put it in the inside pocket of her backpack, lifted her chin the way Diane had taught her, and walked into a building that hated her. That note was the reason she could do it. That note was her mother, walking her to the door every single day. Marcus had no idea it existed. Now, this particular Thursday, Marcus had a board meeting in the city. It was career day at Ridgemont. Parents invited in to talk about their work, and he'd told Ava he probably couldn't make it. Ava had felt something strange when he said it. Relief. Because career day meant her father in the same room as Karen Voss, and Ava lived in quiet terror of those 2 worlds ever touching. But the meeting let out early, and sitting in the back of the car afterward, Marcus felt the ache he felt every single day, the one that whispered how much of his daughter's childhood he was already missing. He thought of Diane, who would have crawled over broken glass to sit in the back of a career day and watch their girl. So he told the driver to turn toward the school. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want to fuss. He just wanted to slip into the back of a room and watch his daughter's face light up when she found him in the crowd. Just a dad, a normal dad, showing up for his kid. He was wearing an old gray jacket and shoes he'd owned for 6 years because he'd been a poor boy too long to ever fully trust a closet full of expensive clothes. No entourage. No watch worth more than a car. The woman at the front desk barely glanced up and waved him toward the cafeteria. He walked down a long hall lined with trophy cases and oil paintings of old headmasters, every one of them white, every one of them staring down at him. He pushed open the double doors, and the first thing he heard was a woman telling his daughter she belonged by the trash. Marcus did not move for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds is nothing in an ordinary life, but in a moment like this, 3 seconds is long enough to hear your own heartbeat in your ears, long enough to feel every muscle in your body turn to stone, long enough to decide what kind of man you are going to be in the next 5 minutes, and what kind of man you refuse to be. He watched Karen Voss stand over his child, cream blazer, lanyard, a face twisted into something that doesn't come from one bad morning. It comes from years of quietly believing certain children are worth less than others. And on the other side of that pointed finger, holding a tray with both hands, her shoulders pulled in small, was Ava. His Ava. The little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest during thunderstorms. The girl who held his hand at her mother's funeral and whispered, "I've got you, Daddy," when it should have been the other way around. That girl was being told she belonged by the garbage, and she wasn't even fighting back, because she had already learned that fighting back only cost her more. Marcus looked around the room before he moved. 300 students, most of them frozen, some already lifting their phones. Near the front, a tall boy in a Ridgemont sweatshirt half rose from his seat like he wanted to help. then sank back down when Ava gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't. Along the serving line, two kitchen workers stared hard at the floor, the posture of people who had seen this 100 times and learned that speaking up only got you fired. At a corner table, an older teacher in a bow tie watched with his jaw clenched, and Marcus saw the exact second the man decided he'd seen enough, rose, and slipped out a side door with his phone already in his hand. That teacher was going to matter, but not yet. Marcus crossed the cafeteria. His old shoes made no sound on the tile. Because here is the thing about a man who grew up with nothing and built everything. He learned long ago that the most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest one. He stopped a few feet away and set his hand gently on Ava's shoulder, the way you touch someone to tell them they are not alone anymore. Ava flinched. Then she turned, and her whole face broke apart, because the two worlds she had spent 4 months keeping separate had just crashed together in the middle of a cafeteria. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" Marcus didn't answer her. Not yet. He turned to Karen Voss instead, and his voice came out level and quiet, with no heat in it at all. "Excuse me, I'm her father. I'd like to understand what's happening here." And this was the moment. This was where the whole thing could still have gone another way. If Karen Voss had looked at this man and simply seen a father, if she'd said there'd been a misunderstanding and handed the girl back her seat, she would have kept her job, her pension, and her name. But Voss looked at Marcus Bennett the same way she looked at his daughter. She saw the worn jacket. She saw the old shoes. She saw no expensive watch, no entourage, none of the signals she'd been trained her whole life to respect. She saw a black man who looked like he had nothing, and to Karen Voss, that was all the information she needed. "Sir," she said, lifting her chin, "this is a school event for enrolled families. And frankly, black kids like yours should be grateful this school even lets them eat here. So take your daughter and go, before I have security remove you both." The words dropped into that silent cafeteria like a stone into still water. Students gasped. Every phone that wasn't already up came up now. Ava shut her eyes. And Marcus Bennett, the man who had just pledged $65 million to build the Children's Technology Institute, that was the only thing standing between this school and total financial ruin, the man whose name was about to reduce Karen Voss's entire life to ash, did not say one word about who he was. He just looked at her, and he let her keep talking. Marcus let the silence sit. He had learned something in 20 years of boardrooms. When a person is showing you exactly who they are, you do not interrupt them. You let them finish. You let every witness in the room watch them finish. So he stood there with his hand still resting on Ava's shoulder, and he said very quietly, "I asked you a simple question. What is happening here?" Karen Voss took that quiet for weakness. That was her first mistake, and it would not be her last. She stepped out from behind the serving line, heels clicking on the tile, and she started walking a slow circle around Marcus, the way a person circles something they've already decided is beneath them. "I'll tell you what's happening," she said, loud now, performing for the room. "Your daughter has been a problem since the day she arrived. She doesn't follow instructions. She thinks the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to her." She paused right in front of Ava and looked down at the girl. "And now I see exactly where she gets it from." Ava's tray was trembling in her hands. Marcus reached over, gently, and took it from her before it could fall. He set it on the nearest table. Then he turned back to Voss with the same terrible calm. "What rules?" he said. "Show me. Show me the written rule that says my daughter sits by the trash cans." Voss's mouth opened, then closed. Because there was no rule. There had never been a rule. She had invented it in her own head 4 months ago, and no one had ever once made her prove it, because no one had ever once stood in front of her and refused to be afraid. "I don't answer to you," she snapped. "And I certainly don't explain school policy to a man who wandered in off the street. Do you even have a child enrolled here, or are you just some—" And here she stopped herself, but everyone in the room heard the shape of the word she'd almost used. Ava flinched like she'd been slapped, and something in the cafeteria shifted. A girl at a nearby table, maybe 15, whispered, "Oh my God," to her friend, and lifted her phone higher. Marcus saw it all. He saw the phones. He saw the frozen kitchen staff. He saw the tall boy in the sweatshirt gripping the edge of his seat, and he made a decision that most fathers could never make in that moment, because every cell in his body was screaming at him to end it, to say the 4 words that would flatten this woman where she stood. "I own this school's future." Instead, he swallowed those words whole, because he understood something Ava didn't yet understand. If he revealed himself now, this became a story about a billionaire, and a billionaire being disrespected is not a story that changes anything. But a poor black father, standing quietly while a school administrator humiliated his child in front of 300 witnesses, that was a story that could burn an entire rotten system to the ground. So he stayed poor, on purpose. He let her keep believing. He looked at Ava. "Sweetheart," he said softly. "How long?" Ava's eyes filled. She shook her head. "Dad, please, not here." "How long, Ava?" And the girl who had held it together for 4 months, who had ironed her uniform and practiced her smile and cried only where no one could see, finally broke in front of the one person she'd been protecting. "Since the first week," she whispered. "Every day, she makes me sit alone. She tells the teachers I'm a discipline problem so they won't believe me. She told the other kids I'm only here because of charity." Her voice cracked into pieces. "I didn't tell you because you already lost Mom and Aunt Grace, and I didn't want to be one more thing that hurt." The cafeteria was dead silent. Even Voss had gone still. And Marcus Bennett, $14 billion, 6,000 employees, 900 hospitals, stood in a school cafeteria and felt his heart break in a way no amount of money had ever been able to protect him from. His daughter had been drowning for 4 months, 10 feet away from a phone that could have called the most powerful man in the state, and she had chosen to drown quietly rather than add 1 ounce to his grief. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. He took both her hands. "You listen to me," he said, loud enough for the room. "You did nothing wrong. Not one thing. You hear me? Nothing." And then Marcus saw it. Ava's backpack had fallen open when Voss yanked the chair, and something small had slipped halfway out of the inside pocket. A scrap of paper, folded soft, worn almost transparent at the creases. Marcus reached down and picked it up before he even knew what it was. And when he unfolded it, the whole world went quiet. "Be brave today, baby." He knew that handwriting. He had read it on grocery lists and lesson plans and birthday cards for 16 years. He had read it on the last note Diane ever left on the kitchen counter, the morning she went to the hospital and never came home. His wife's hand, his wife's voice. On a scrap of paper his daughter had carried into this place every single day, folded and refolded so many times it was falling apart, because it was the only piece of her mother she had left to hold. Marcus understood, all at once, everything Ava had been doing, every morning, every locked bathroom stall, every smile she practiced in the mirror. She had been trying to be brave, the way her dying mother asked her to be, alone, for 4 months, in a place that was breaking her. He looked up at his daughter. His voice barely worked. "You've been carrying this the whole time." Ava's face crumpled. "It's how I got through the mornings," she whispered. "It's like she walks me in." And Marcus Bennett, who had not cried in front of anyone since the day he buried his wife, stood in the middle of a school cafeteria and felt the tears come, and did not wipe them away, and did not care who saw. He folded the note back along its soft creases, exactly the way Ava had folded it, and he pressed it gently back into her hand and closed her fingers around it. "Then keep it close," he said, "because she was right, and she'd be so proud of how brave you've been. But you don't have to be brave alone anymore. I'm here now." Then he stood back up, turned to Karen Voss, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes that made her take a step backward without knowing why. "I'd like your name," he said, "and your title. I'm making a formal complaint." Voss recovered fast. People like her always did. She laughed, a short, ugly sound, and reached for the radio on her hip. "We'll see about complaints," she said. "Security is going to walk you out of here in about 90 seconds. She keyed the radio. "Security to the cafeteria, please. I have a trespasser refusing to leave." But before security could answer, a chair scraped hard against the tile at the corner table. The older teacher in the bow tie was on his feet. He had walked out a minute earlier, and now he was back, and his face was white, and he was staring at Marcus the way a man stares at something he cannot quite believe is real. This was Mr. Ellison, who had taught chemistry at Ridgemont for 31 years, and Mr. Ellison had a photographic memory for faces, an old teacher's gift, and he had spent the last 60 seconds in the hallway with his phone, checking something, because something about the man in the gray jacket had been scratching at the back of his mind from the moment he walked in. Now he knew. "Karen," Mr. Ellison said. His voice was shaking. "Karen, put the radio down." Voss ignored him. "Henry, stay out of this. I have it handled." "You don't," Mr. Ellison said. "You really, really don't." He walked toward them slowly, holding up his phone, and on the screen was a photograph from 3 weeks earlier. The Ridgemont board announcement, a shot from the local business page, and in the center of it, in a charcoal suit this time instead of a gray jacket, standing at a podium beside the board, was the exact same man now standing in the cafeteria. Mr. Ellison turned the phone around so Voss could see it. Then he said the words that ended everything. "Karen, that is Marcus Bennett. He's the man funding the new institute. He's the reason this school still has a future." He turned to look at Ava, and his old eyes filled. "And that little girl you've been putting by the trash cans for 4 months, that's his daughter." The radio slipped in Karen Voss's hand and clattered against the counter. You could watch it happen on her face. 22 years of certainty collapsing in real time, layer by layer, like a building coming down in slow motion. Her eyes went from the phone, to Marcus, to the worn gray jacket, to the old shoes, to Ava, back to the phone. And you could see her mind refusing it, because it did not fit anything she had ever believed about who has money and who doesn't, who belongs and who doesn't. "That's not," she said. "That can't be. He's," and she gestured helplessly at his clothes, at his skin, at everything she had used to decide he was nothing. Marcus finally spoke, and his voice was so quiet the whole room leaned in to hear it. "Go ahead," he said. "Finish that sentence." Karen Voss did not finish the sentence, and it mattered. It mattered enormously that it was Mr. Ellison who said it. Not an administrator trying to protect the school. Not a board member protecting an investment. A teacher. One of the adults who was supposed to have protected Ava from the beginning, who had looked away for 4 months like all the others, and who had finally, watching a stranger refuse to be afraid, found the courage to stop looking away. The first crack in the wall of silence came from inside the building. That was the moment the whole thing started to come down. Marcus looked out at the room, at the forest of raised phones, every red light blinking. "I didn't bring those," he said quietly. "You did." And then Ava, standing beside her father, did something that broke the room open. She had spent 4 months being told to be small, to be quiet, to be grateful. And now, with her father's hand on her shoulder and her mother's note folded tight in her fist, she looked directly at Karen Voss, the woman who had haunted every single day of her life, and she said the thing she had been swallowing for 4 months. "There was never a table by the trash. You made it up. You made it up so you could watch me sit alone." Karen Voss opened her mouth, and this time nothing came out at all. It was Mr. Ellison who had made a call from the hallway. And 10 minutes later, the double doors opened, and Robert Hollis, president of the Board of Trustees, came through them at something close to a run, his tie crooked, his face the color of paper. But Hollis was not walking in to reveal anything. Everyone in the room already knew. Hollis was walking into the ruins of his own career because he understood, the second he saw Marcus Bennett standing in that cafeteria, exactly what it meant. He had shaken this man's hand 3 weeks ago. He had called him the most important partner in the school's history. And now his own assistant principal had called security on the man's daughter, in front of 300 phones, and there was footage. "Mr. Bennett," Hollis started, "I am so deeply, this is not, please." And Marcus lifted one hand, and Hollis stopped like a switch had been flipped. Marcus wasn't looking at him, he was looking at Voss. "You want to know the saddest part?" he said. And now, for the first time, the crowd could hear something moving underneath the calm, something huge and slow, like a current under ice. If you had just been kind to a child, not because of who her father is, just because she is a 14-year-old girl standing in a lunch line, you would have gone home tonight and never known who I was. You'd have kept your job, your pension, your name. He shook his head slowly, but you couldn't do it. You looked at a little girl and a man in an old jacket, and you decided we were nothing, and you were so sure of it you did it out loud, in front of 300 witnesses. Karen Voss started to cry then, but Marcus was already turning away from her, because there was something more important to find out. While Robert Hollis was still stammering, Marcus quietly knelt back down and asked his daughter one question that changed everything. "Ava," he said, "is it just you? Or does she do this to other kids too?" And Ava, still shaking, looked across the cafeteria at a table near the far wall. Not the trash table, a different one, where 4 other students sat, 3 black, 1 Latino, all of them watching this unfold with an expression Marcus recognized instantly, because he had worn it himself in a hospital hallway when he was 12. The expression of someone who has learned that the adults will not save you, so you'd better learn to make yourself small. "It's not just me," Ava whispered. "It's all of us. She calls it sorting. She says it's for our own comfort. She's been doing it for years. Years." A boy at that table, maybe 16, stood up. His name was Preston, and his hands were shaking, but he stood up anyway, because a stranger in an old gray jacket had just done the one thing no adult at Ridgemont had ever done. He'd refused to be afraid. "She told me I couldn't try out for debate," Preston said, his voice unsteady. "Said I wouldn't fit the team's image. I made varsity anyway, and she stopped calling on me in every class after that." A girl stood next. "She reported me to the office for being too loud," she said. "I was laughing. That's it. I was laughing at lunch." Then another, and another. One by one, the students Karen Voss had spent years teaching to stay small, stood up in front of 300 people and stopped being small. And every one of them was talking into a forest of phones. Marcus listened to all of it. And with every story his face got harder, not with rage, but with a grief so deep it looked like calm. Because he was not just hearing about his daughter anymore. He was hearing about Grace, waiting in a hallway. He was hearing about every child that a system had decided was worth less. He was hearing his own mother, coming home at 2 in the morning smelling of bleach, being told with 1,000 small cruelties that she would only ever be the person who cleaned the building, never the person who belonged in it. He turned to Robert Hollis. "How many complaints," he said, "over the years? How many parents came to this school and told you what was happening to their children?" Hollis went gray. "I would have to check the..." "How many?" Marcus said. "Did you bury?" And that word, bury, landed in the room like a verdict. Because everyone watching, every student, every teacher, every kitchen worker who had spent years staring at the floor, understood in that instant that this had never been about one cruel woman. Karen Voss was only able to do what she did because a whole building of adults had decided, over and over, that it was easier to look away. Marcus knelt back down in front of his daughter. "Ava," he said, "I need you to understand something, and I need you to remember it for the rest of your life." He held her face in both his hands. "The reason this happened to you is not because you were weak. It happened because you were kind enough to try to protect me, and that is the opposite of weak. That is the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." Ava started to cry, really cry, for the first time in 4 months, the tears she'd been closing the door on since her first week. And Marcus held her right there in the middle of the cafeteria, in his worn gray jacket, while 300 phones recorded a billionaire who looked like he had nothing holding a daughter who was worth more to him than everything he owned. And in the middle of that, Karen Voss made her final mistake. She tried to leave. She thought, in the chaos of it, that she could simply slip out the side door and let the administration handle the mess. She untied nothing, apologized to no one, and turned to walk out on the child she'd tormented and the students she'd broken. Marcus saw her move, and for the first time all day he raised his voice. "Where do you think you're going?" Karen Voss froze, and she turned around slowly to find that the double doors behind her had opened one more time, and what walked through them was worse for her than security. It was a woman in a sharp navy suit carrying a leather bag, flanked by 2 people with laptops, and she was scanning the room with the flat, unimpressed calm of someone who ends careers for a living.
Catherine Reyes,
Marcus said, without looking away from Voss. "Chief Legal Counsel, Bennett Systems. She was in the car with me." Catherine Reyes looked at Karen Voss the way you look at a math problem you've already solved. "Nobody," she said pleasantly, "is going anywhere." Catherine Reyes did not raise her voice one time in the next 20 minutes. She didn't need to. She started with a subpoena, drafted in the car on the drive over, because Marcus had told her one sentence over the phone from the hallway, and Catherine had understood immediately that one sentence would become a case. She presented it to Robert Hollis, and Hollis, who understood that his own career was now hanging by a thread thinner than a hair, did the only smart thing he had done all day. He cooperated completely. But here is where it did not go the way anyone expected, because Catherine did not start with the security footage the way a normal investigation would. She started somewhere quieter, somewhere crueler. She started with the one thing Karen Voss had been most careful about, the thing she was proudest of, the thing she never dreamed would become the noose. She started with the paperwork Voss had filed to make it all look official. Over her 22 years, Karen Voss had learned to hide cruelty inside procedure. She never wrote down what she actually did. She wrote down reasons, justifications, clean, professional, defensible little notes that turned a targeted child into a documented discipline problem. And Catherine Reyes, who had spent a career reading exactly this kind of paperwork, pulled it all apart thread by thread, because a lie written down 11 times stops looking like 11 separate incidents and starts looking like a pattern. By that evening, Catherine's team had assembled it all. The referral files, the personnel record, the discipline database going back 6 years. And then, last, because Catherine wanted the timeline locked before anyone saw the video, the cafeteria security footage. Every camera, 90 days archived. What they found was worse than anyone in that cafeteria had imagined. Over 6 years, Karen Voss had written up Black and Latino students at nearly 4 times the rate of white students for the exact same behavior. Laughing at lunch, speaking up in class, walking in a hallway. 2 white students throwing food got a warning. A black student who dropped a tray got a formal referral and a note in his file that followed him for years. The pattern was so clean it looked like a policy, but there was no policy. Karen Voss had simply built one, quietly, one keystroke at a time, and no one above her had ever once checked. They found 19 formal complaints from parents of color over those 6 years. 11 had been marked resolved with no action taken. 3 families had never received any response at all, and Catherine found the exit interviews of 7 students who had transferred out of Ridgemont, every one of them citing the same thing in their own careful words. They did not feel safe. They did not feel welcome. They did not feel seen. Nobody had ever followed up. Nobody had ever asked why. And then Catherine found the thing that made even Marcus go quiet: Ava's file. In her 4 months, Karen Voss had written Ava up 11 times. For nothing. For sitting in the wrong seat, a seat Voss had invented. For being uncooperative, when she'd asked why she couldn't sit with her friends. For a disrespectful attitude, on the day Ava had quietly asked a teacher for help and been ignored. 11 marks on the permanent record of a grieving 14-year-old girl whose only crime was being brilliant and black in a building, run by a woman who couldn't stand the combination. Marcus read his daughter's file in silence. Then he set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that might break. And he said one thing, so quiet only Catherine heard it. She wrote down every single day she hurt my child, and she thought that would protect her. It won't, Catherine said. It's going to be the whole case. Meanwhile, the story had already left the building, because in a cafeteria of 300 teenagers, some things move faster than any lawyer. The tall boy in the sweatshirt, the one who'd half risen from his seat, was named Devon, and Devon had captured 9 minutes of unbroken footage. Karen Voss circling Marcus, the word she'd almost used. Black kids like yours should be grateful this school even lets them eat here. And Ava, small and shaking, saying there was never a table by the trash. Devon uploaded it that night. He didn't write a caption. He didn't need to. By morning it had 2 million views. By the next night, 11 million. The school's name trended in every state in the country. And sitting in her kitchen 400 miles away, a woman named Denise Carter watched a 9-minute video on her phone and put her hand over her mouth because she recognized that cream blazer. She recognized that pointed finger. 2 years earlier, her son had come home from Ridgemont and stopped eating and stopped talking and finally transferred and had never once told her the whole reason why. Denise Carter picked up her phone and called the number on the screen, and she was not the last parent to call, but that was tomorrow. Tonight, back in the cafeteria, there was still one thing left to do. Because Karen Voss, cornered, terrified, watching her entire life come apart, turned to the one weapon she had left. She looked at Marcus Bennett, and with tears running down her face, she said the words that people like her always save for last. "Please," she whispered. "I have a family. I have children of my own. Please don't do this to me." And the whole cafeteria held its breath to see what the billionaire in the worn gray jacket would say to that. Marcus Bennett looked at the crying woman for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. That was the thing that made it land so hard. He did not scream. He did not gloat. He spoke to her the way you'd speak to someone at a funeral. "You have children," he said. Karen Voss nodded frantically, hope flickering in her wet eyes. "Then you know exactly what you did," Marcus said. "You knew every single day that the girl at that table by the trash was somebody's daughter. You knew Preston was somebody's son. You knew every child you sorted and shrank and wrote up was going to go home to a parent who loved them." He paused. "You knew, and you did it anyway. So please don't stand in front of my daughter and ask me for the mercy you never once gave her." The hope went out of Karen Voss's face like a candle in the wind. "I'm not going to scream at you," Marcus said. "I'm not going to have you dragged out. That's what you'd have done to me." He shook his head slowly. "What's going to happen to you is much simpler than that. It's just the truth. The truth is going to happen to you. Every complaint you buried, every file you padded, every child you told to be grateful, all of it is going to come out, in daylight, with your name on it. Not because I'm powerful, because you wrote it all down and never thought anyone would read it." He turned to Robert Hollis. "Effective tonight," Marcus said. "She's suspended, pending an investigation that my legal team will be observing very closely. Every complaint your school buried gets reopened. Every family that was ignored gets contacted. And every student in that database with a referral from this woman gets their record reviewed and corrected." Hollis was nodding so fast he looked like he might hurt himself. "Yes, yes, of course. All of it. Immediately." "And the Institute," Hollis said, his voice small. "The 65 million. He didn't finish the question. Marcus looked at him for a long time. And here, the story turned in a way nobody in that cafeteria expected, because everyone was braced for the billionaire to say the words they all knew were coming. The pledge is dead. This school gets nothing, and it would have been fair. It would have been deserved. Instead, Marcus said this: "The $65 million was never for you, Robert. It was never for the board, or the buildings, or the name on the plaque." He looked around the cafeteria, at the students still standing, the ones Karen Voss had spent years teaching to be small. It was for them. So a kid from a neighborhood like the one I grew up in could walk into a lab in this building and become the engineer my little sister never got to be. He turned back to Hollis. "You don't get to take that away from these children just because your school failed them. The money stays. But it comes with conditions, and I promise you, you are going to earn every dollar of it." The cafeteria erupted, not in cheering, in something deeper and messier than cheering, a sound made of relief and grief and disbelief all at once. Students were crying. The kitchen workers who'd stared at the floor for years were staring at Marcus now. Devin was still filming, tears running down his own face, hands somehow steady. And Ava. Ava was looking up at her father like she was seeing him for the very first time. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, the boy from Cleveland who sat in a hospital hallway at 12 years old and decided the world was going to be different because he was in it. Karen Voss stood alone in the middle of all of it. No one looked at her. That was the whole punishment, in the end. She had spent 22 years making children invisible, and now she was the invisible one, standing in a room full of people who had simply stopped seeing her. Catherine Reyes stepped forward and said something quiet to her, and Karen Voss untied her lanyard with shaking hands, set it on the counter, and walked toward the side door alone. She passed the kitchen staff on her way out. Not one of them looked up, and just as the door was closing behind her, a small voice stopped the entire room. Wait, it was Ava. She crossed the cafeteria, past 300 students, past the board president, past her own father, and she stopped in front of the woman who had made every day of her life a quiet hell for 4 months. The whole room went silent, bracing for what a hurt child might finally say to the person who hurt her. Ava looked at Karen Voss, and what came out of her mouth was the last thing anyone expected. What she said next did not just end Karen Voss. It changed the whole meaning of everything that had happened that day. Ava stood in front of Karen Voss, and the whole cafeteria held still. Everyone was braced for the same thing. 300 students, a board president, a legal team, a father with $14 billion, all of them waiting for a hurt child to finally hand back some of the pain she'd been carrying for 4 months. It would have been fair. God knows it would have been fair. Instead, Ava opened her hand. The note was inside it, her mother's 4 soft creased words facing up, and she said this: "I used to think it was my fault." Karen Voss blinked. Ava's voice was quiet, but it carried. Because the room was so silent, you could hear the ventilation fans turning 3 floors up. "Every day for 4 months," she said, "I asked myself what I did wrong. I ironed my uniform so you couldn't find a wrinkle. I sat where you told me to sit. I stopped raising my hand so you couldn't call me disrespectful. I made myself smaller and smaller and smaller, and I still couldn't figure out what I did to make you hate me." Her eyes filled, but her voice did not break. "My mom died 2 years ago. Before she did, she left me a note that says, 'Be brave today.' I read it every single morning before I walked in here, because walking in here took everything I had." She looked down at the paper in her hand, then back up at Voss. "I used to think being brave meant not letting you see me cry, but my dad walked in today and showed me what it really means. It means telling the truth out loud. So here it is. It was never my fault. It was always yours, and I am not going to carry it for you anymore." Then Ava turned around and walked back to her father, and she did not look at Karen Voss again. And that, more than anything Marcus had said, more than the lawyer, more than the buried files, is what broke the room open. because a grown woman had spent 4 months teaching a 14-year-old girl to hate herself, and the girl had just quietly handed that hatred back and refused to carry it one more step. Students were sobbing openly now. The tall boy, Devin, wiped his face with his sleeve and kept the camera steady, because some part of him understood he was filming something that mattered. Karen Voss walked out the side door alone. The door clicked shut behind her. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. Marcus pulled his daughter into his arms and held her, and over the top of her head, he looked out at the cafeteria, at the students who'd stood up, at Preston, at the kitchen workers who'd finally lifted their eyes off the floor. And he said one thing, loud enough for the whole room. If any of you have ever been made to feel the way my daughter was made to feel in here, I want you to hear me. It was never your fault. It was never about you, and I am going to make sure it never happens in this building again. That night, Devin's video went up. By morning, it had 2 million views. By the second night, 11 million. By the end of the week, it had crossed 30 million, and the school's name was trending in all 50 states, with a hashtag Devin never even had to write. National news ran the 9 minutes of footage on a loop. Cable panels argued about it. Morning shows played the clip and cut to anchors who didn't have anything to say because there was nothing to say. A little girl had been told she belonged by the trash, and the whole country had watched it happen. And in a kitchen 400 miles away, Denise Carter watched that video for the 9th time and finally understood why her son had stopped eating 2 years ago. She picked up her phone. She called the number Catherine Reyes's office had posted for former families. She was the first call. She was not the last. Denise Carter's son was named Isaiah, and 2 years earlier he had been a freshman at Ridgemont with a 4.0 and a stutter. Karen Voss had decided the stutter meant he wasn't ready for the school's advanced track, no matter what his grades said. She wrote him up for being disruptive when he took too long to answer a question in class. She told him, quietly, in a hallway where no one else could hear, that maybe Ridgemont wasn't the right fit for a boy like him. Isaiah stopped raising his hand. Then he stopped eating lunch. Then he stopped talking at home. He transferred at the end of the year and never told his mother the full story, because he was 14 and he had decided, the way Ava had decided, that some things you just carry alone. Denise watched the video and finally asked her son the question she'd been too afraid to ask for 2 years. And Isaiah, now 16, sat at the kitchen table and told her everything. She called the next morning, and within a week, 6 more families had called. Within 2 weeks, 14. The Diane Bennett Foundation, named for Marcus's late wife, quietly paid for legal representation for every single family, no exceptions, no paperwork, no questions. Marcus made exactly one public statement about the whole thing. Just one. This was never about my daughter. This is about every child who was ever made to feel small in a room where they belonged. An investigative reporter named Grace Okafor at a national outlet, and Marcus noticed the name and had to sit down for a minute when he saw the byline, published a 3-part series called The Sorting. It documented 6 years of complaints, cover-ups, and silence at one of the most prestigious schools in America. She had the database. She had the exit interviews. She had 19 buried complaints and the names of the administrators who buried them. National outlets picked it up within hours. Ridgemont's applications for the following year dropped by nearly a third in 3 weeks. Donors who'd given for decades pulled their names off buildings. Alumni wrote open letters. The student government passed a unanimous vote of no confidence in the administration that had let it happen. And Robert Hollis, the board president who had gone pale in that cafeteria, understood that the pallor had been the beginning of the end for him too. Because Grace Okafor's second article had a section about him specifically, about 11 complaints that had crossed his desk over 6 years and been marked resolved and forgotten. Hollis resigned within the month. He did not hold a press conference. He sent one paragraph to the board on a Sunday night and was gone by Monday. The state opened a civil rights investigation. The findings, when they came, were worse than even the video suggested, because the video had only captured one afternoon, and the database captured 6 years. Karen Voss was found to have systematically discriminated against students of color in violation of federal civil rights law. She lost her teaching credential permanently. She was barred from ever again holding any position involving children. The civil suit brought on behalf of 14 families settled for millions, paid by the school's insurer, and every dollar of it went into trusts for the children whose records and confidence Karen Voss had spent years quietly destroying. But the number that mattered most to Marcus was not any of those. It was the number of families who called and said the same thing, in slightly different words, over and over. We thought it was just us. We thought we were the only ones. We thought maybe our kid really was the problem. They weren't. They never had been. And now, finally, they knew it. 6 weeks after the cafeteria, the school held a hearing. It was supposed to be a formality, a public session where the state investigators presented findings and the new interim administration accepted them. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. The 14 families sat together in the front rows, and behind them sat students, teachers, alumni, and reporters. Denise Carter sat with her arm around Isaiah, who had come back to face the building that had broken him. Marcus and Ava sat quietly near the middle, not up front, because Marcus had insisted this day was not about him. And then, near the end, something happened that no one had planned. The interim administrator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Nwosu, who had been brought in specifically to clean house, finished reading the findings, and then she set down her papers and did something not on the agenda. She invited any student who wanted to speak to come to the microphone. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Preston stood up, the boy who'd been told he didn't fit the debate team's image. He walked to the microphone, and his hands were shaking exactly the way they'd shaken in the cafeteria, and he said, "I almost didn't come back after that day. I thought this school was never going to be for people like me." Then he looked at Marcus. "But a man who didn't have to do anything for me stood in a cafeteria and refused to be afraid. So I decided I wasn't going to be afraid either." Then a girl stood, then another. One by one, the children Karen Voss had spent years teaching to be small stood up in a packed auditorium in front of cameras and stopped being small. They told their stories into a live microphone, and every story was a wound, and every story was also a kind of healing, because they were finally being heard by a building that had spent years refusing to listen. And then Isaiah stood up. Isaiah, who had transferred out 2 years ago with a stutter and a broken heart. Isaiah, who hadn't spoken about it to anyone but his mother. He walked to the microphone slowly, and the whole auditorium went quiet, because everyone who'd read Grace Okafor's series knew his name. He stood at the microphone for a long moment, and then he spoke, slowly, carefully, working around the stutter he'd once been written up for. "My name is Isaiah Carter," he said. 2 years ago, a woman in this school told me I didn't belong here. And I believed her. I believed her so much I stopped eating. I stopped talking. I gave up on myself before I was even 16. He took a breath. "I'm here today because I want every kid in this room who feels the way I felt to know something. She was wrong. She was wrong about me, and she was wrong about you. And it took a stranger in an old jacket walking into a cafeteria for me to finally believe it." The auditorium was dead silent. And then Marcus Bennett stood up in the middle of the crowd, this time not as a father, not as a billionaire, but just as a man, and he began to clap. And the whole room rose with him, not a polished, comfortable applause, a rough, uneven, tear-soaked wall of sound, the kind of sound a room makes when it has been holding something in for a very long time. Ava stood beside her father, and she was crying, but for the first time in months, they were not the kind of tears she had to hide behind a locked bathroom door. They were the other kind. The kind you cry when something that was broken finally starts to mend. 7 months later, the cafeteria looked like a different place. The far wall, where the trash can table used to sit, had been cleared. In its place hung a long banner made by the students themselves, and it read, in bright hand-painted letters, "Every seat belongs to everyone." Underneath it, the tables were full, and the students at them were every color the school had, laughing over trays of food, arguing about homework, being 14 and 16 and free. Karen Voss was gone. Robert Hollis was gone. In their place, Dr. Patricia Nwosu ran the school now, and her first act as permanent head had been to rewrite the discipline handbook from the first page to the last. Her second act had been to walk through the cafeteria at lunch every single day, learning names, sitting with students, eating the same food they ate. She'd started a tradition called open lunch, where once a month parents were invited to eat alongside their kids, and the room those days was loud and warm and full. The $65 million stayed. Marcus made sure of it, but it came with the conditions he'd promised. The new Children's Technology Institute broke ground that spring, and carved above its front doors, at Marcus's request, were two names. Diane Bennett, for the wife who spent her life teaching children to believe in themselves, and who left her daughter 4 words to walk her through the dark. And Grace, just Grace, for a little girl from Cleveland who never got to be the engineer she dreamed of being. 50 full scholarships were attached to that building, permanent and renewable, for brilliant kids from neighborhoods like the one Marcus grew up in, so that the next Grace would never have to wait in a hallway, so that the next Ava would always have a seat. Isaiah Carter reapplied to Ridgemont and was accepted. On his first day back, Ava met him at the cafeteria door with a tray already waiting at a table by the window, the good table, in the light. Denise Carter watched from the parents section on open lunch day and did not say a word, because some things are too big for words. She just held her son's hand. Preston became captain of the debate team he'd once been told he didn't fit. Devin, the boy who'd filmed the whole thing, never took the video down. It had crossed 50 million views. He said he kept it up so that no school would ever again believe it could do this quietly. And Ava started a program she called the Welcome Table. It paired every new student, especially the ones who came in scared and quiet and unsure they belonged, with an older student who'd promised to make sure they never had to eat alone. By the end of its first semester, it had more volunteers than it had new students, which Ava said was the whole point. On a Friday afternoon in October, Marcus Bennett stood at the back of that cafeteria in a worn gray jacket. Same room, same tile floor, same fluorescent lights, but everything else was different. The sound was different, the faces were different, and in the middle of it all sat his daughter, surrounded by friends of every color, laughing so hard that one of them knocked over a carton of juice, and Ava grabbed a napkin and cleaned it up without missing a beat, still laughing, still light, still finally free. Dr. Nwosu walked over to him. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "it's open lunch. Will you join the line? We've got a seat for you." Marcus smiled. He picked up a tray, and he walked toward his daughter's table. Before he sat down, Ava reached into her bag and pulled out something small and folded soft. The note. She smoothed it flat on the table between them, her mother's slanted handwriting facing up. "Be brave today, baby. I don't read it every morning anymore," Ava said. "Not because I forgot her, just because..." And she looked around the bright, loud, full cafeteria, the one that had once tried to make her disappear. "I don't need it to get through the door anymore." Marcus looked at the note, then at his daughter. "Keep it anyway," he said. "I will," Ava said. "I'm going to give it to my own kid one day." She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. The smile she used to have to practice in a mirror, now just there, easy and real. "And I'll tell them their grandmother walked me into the hardest place I ever stood, and then their grandfather walked me out. Somewhere behind the counter, a tray clattered, and someone laughed, and the ordinary happy noise of a cafeteria that finally belonged to everyone rose up around them like water closing over something healed." He could have done 100 things differently that first day. He could have revealed himself in the first 10 seconds and ended it clean. He could have pulled Ava out and sent her somewhere else and let his lawyers handle the rest from a distance. He could have taken his $65 million and walked away and let the school rot. Instead, he stayed, week after week, Friday after Friday, because he'd learned a long time ago, in a hospital hallway when he was 12, that money is not what changes a place. Power is not what changes a place. What changes a place is people who refuse to look away, and people who refuse to stay silent, and people who keep showing up. Here is the truth underneath this whole story. Dignity is not something a child should have to earn by having the right parents or the right last name or the right amount of money. The Karen Vosses of this world do not survive because they are powerful. They survive because everyone around them stays quiet. The teachers who look away. The administrators who bury the complaints because fixing them is inconvenient. The whole building of adults who decide, over and over, that one silent child is not worth the risk. But when just one person refuses to stay quiet, the whole thing falls apart. Sometimes it takes a father in an old gray jacket. Sometimes it only takes a chemistry teacher finding his courage 31 years too late. Either way, it starts with one person in the room who decides not to look away. You don't need $14 billion to stop a Karen Voss. You need a phone, a witness, and the willingness to stand in the doorway and say, out loud, in the room where it's happening, that this is not okay. So here's my question for you. If you had walked into that cafeteria as a stranger, and you had heard what Marcus heard, what would you have done? Would you have stepped forward? Would you have pulled out your phone? Would you have stood in the doorway? Or would you have told yourself it wasn't your business and looked away like everyone else? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reached something real in you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because there is always another child sitting alone at another table right now, waiting to find out whether anyone in the room is brave enough to stand up. The only question is, who is going to be standing in the doorway?